Thank you all again. I want to welcome you to tonight's webinar. This is a really important discussion, and I'm grateful you all are here with us. My name is Sarah Newman. I'm the founder and executive director of the Climate Mental Health Network. And before we get started, I just want to take a moment for us to pause and just take a few deep breaths to help us get settled in for the next hour that we're going to spend together. So if you want to just find a comfortable position and just take a few deep breaths in and out and in and out. And just one more breath and an exhale just to get settled in. Okay, great. And welcome back. Thank you again for being here. And I also want to thank all of our partners who helped to make this webinar happen tonight. Project Drawdown, Grist, We Don't Have Time, the New York Climate Exchange, and the National Academy of Medicine's Climate Communities Network. We also have an incredible group of speakers tonight. My colleague, Larissa Dooley, who is Director of Research and Evaluation at the Climate Mental Health Network, Elizabeth Bagley, who's the Managing Director of Project Drawdown, Joshua Lowe, who is the Director of Partnerships at the Yale Program on Climate Change Communications. And tonight's discussion will be moderated by Kate Yoder, who is a Senior Staff Writer at Grist. So a huge thank you to all of them. And just a couple of housekeeping items. You can submit questions directly to the panelists throughout the webinar using the Q&A function. And then the other part is on the bottom of your screen, you can opt in to turn on closed captioning by clicking on the square button that says CC. So here's what's going to happen tonight. First, you're going to hear from my colleague Larissa, who will share about her work about emotional resilience and this new framework and toolkit that she's created. Then we're going to dive into a panel discussion followed by a Q&A. At the end, we're going to have a very brief survey for you to complete. And everyone who fills out the survey will be eligible to win a book. We have a collection of newly released books generously donated by authors. So if you would like one, please fill out the survey that will be on the screen at the end. And last, a recording of tonight's webinar, along with links to all of the resources, will be sent to you within a week. So be on the lookout for that in your inbox. So I'm really excited to turn this over to my colleague Larissa, who, as I said, has created this incredible framework about building emotional resilience. And this is something that we at the Climate Mental Health Network are now going to integrate into our strategy and across all of our programs. It is our hope that this will be adopted and used by organizations, families, educators, individuals, and others across the country and perhaps across the globe. There's lots of people from around the world joining us tonight. We can't fully respond or address the physical dimensions of climate change without acknowledging and addressing the emotional impacts. And we hope that this new model will be a roadmap to guide people in this process of developing and building that emotional resilience. And as you will see throughout tonight's webinar, how this model that Larissa has developed is really interrelated with all of the work of all of the other speakers tonight. So once again, a huge thank you to all of you for joining us from around the world and across the United States. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Larissa Dooley.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm really happy to be here to introduce this new resource that I created with Climate Mental Health Network about building emotional resilience in a climate-changed world. This resource was really born out of questions that I've personally been wrestling with over the past few years. Like so many of us, I've been troubled by the way that our world is changing. Political divisions run deep. Technology is rapidly changing every aspect of the way we live. And the climate is changing, making wildfires and storms more frequent and severe. And the reality of climate change became especially personal for me in January of last year when wildfires devastated my hometown of Los Angeles. Compared to this sense of kind of relative stability that I felt growing up in the 1980s and 90s, the future now feels more murky, more uncertain and unstable. And I was left with questions that kept nagging at me. What would we need emotionally to face these tremendous challenges? What inner resources should we be cultivating now to prepare for what's ahead? And beyond just coping and survival, is it possible to live good lives, even in a time like this? Joyful, meaningful, connected lives, even as the world around us changes in hard and often unsettling ways. In other words, how do we cultivate the inner resources, the emotional resilience that we need to survive and even potentially thrive in times like this? Psychological resilience was the focus of my research in graduate school, so I returned to the literature in search of clues and insights. And what we know is this, that the human capacity for emotional resilience is remarkable and well documented. Across histories and cultures, people have found ways to endure incredible loss, adapt to massive change, and care for one another under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. So, what does this emotional resilience look like, and what are the skills or characteristics or capacities that make people resilient in the face of adversity? When researchers look at people who endured incredible hardships like war and refugee camps and major disasters, what distinguishes those who manage to survive and even thrive from those who are overwhelmed by those same conditions? One of the most consistent findings in resilience research is this, that resilient people are not defined by the absence of distress. They still experience despair and grief and anger in the face of loss and adversity. Rather, resilient people are defined by their ability to also experience positive emotions, such as connection and gratitude and humor, alongside the negative. Psychologists call this capacity affective complexity, the ability to experience a rich, layered emotional life rather than being dominated by a single emotional state. Affective complexity allows people to move through hardship with greater psychological flexibility, making it possible to feel both sorrow and appreciation, anxiety and agency, grief and meaning at the same time. And I think this is really important because it underscores the goal of this work. Building emotional resilience is not about eliminating grief and anxiety or uncertainty about the future and about climate change. These are natural and warranted responses to the planetary changes that we're living through, and they can motivate action. So we don't want to get rid of them. The goal instead is to learn how to live with these emotions and still manage to experience meaning and joy and wonder and connection, to still really enjoy our lives. And the good news is that emotional resilience is available to all of us. The research is loud and clear that resilience is not an inborn trait. It's not something you're either born with or not. It's a set of skills and capacities that can be developed and strengthened with intentional practice. So the natural next question is, how do we do that? How do we actually build our resilience muscles in real life? Well, that's the question I tried to respond to in this guide, drawing on research in resilience, positive psychology, and climate mental health. And what emerged is a simple framework for building climate emotional resilience with 3 stages. Let be, noticing and naming your feelings. Let flow, processing painful feelings. And let in, cultivating positive feelings and experiences. This framework is based on psychological research and adapted from Rick Hanson's work on resilience, but translated here specifically for the emotional realities of climate change. And of note, this isn't a linear process. It's something we can move through again and again, and sometimes multiple times in a single day as we try to kind of continue to stay present and resourced and engaged in a changing world. The first step, to kind of unpack that a little bit, the first step, let be, is about cultivating awareness of our climate emotions. This step invites us to notice what we're feeling with openness and curiosity and without judgment or any kind of need to fix what we're feeling. It can be helpful in this step to specifically name the emotion that we're feeling, to say to ourselves, I'm feeling shame or anxiety or anger. Research has shown that Labeling our emotions can help engage the regions of the brain associated with emotion regulation and help us feel calmer and more in control of our emotions. And if we're having trouble naming our emotions or we don't know where to start, the climate emotions wheel, which is pictured here, a tool that presents commonly experienced emotions related to climate change, can kind of help you name your emotions or name it to tame it, as Dan Siegel says. Let be, this first step, is also about noticing how our emotions show up physically. Emotions aren't just thoughts, they're patterns of sensation in the body. And you might notice, for example, tightness in your chest or tension in your shoulders or shallow breathing. And noticing these sensations can help us understand what's going on in our nervous systems and alert us that we might need some care or support. And also, emotions carry information. They're trying to tell you something, and that's their purpose. So fear and grief and anger and worry, they're not problems to eliminate. They're signals that show us what matters to us, and they can help guide our behavior or our action. So let be doesn't, it's not solving the problem of climate change, but it lays the groundwork for building resilience. Once we've noticed what we're feeling, the next question is, do we need to hold on to these feelings or can we let them flow? Let flow is about helping difficult emotions pass through the body rather than getting stuck and clogging up the works. Emotions are meant to be temporary, but when negative emotions like stress or anxiety stay activated for prolonged periods of time, they can cause wear and tear on the brain and body, leading to burnout, numbness, or ultimately withdrawal. We provide in the guide some practices for helping to process negative feelings like breath work and movement, creative expression, connecting with others. And these practices are meant to really release the kind of death grip of intense negative emotions and allow them to kind of to flow before they become overwhelming or damaging. And really importantly, letting emotions flow doesn't mean giving up or forgetting about the problem of climate change. Letting flow is about protecting our health and our capacity to stay present and engaged with climate change and action over time. This step helps make sustained engagement possible. Finally, let in the kind of third step. And again, this is a very cyclical process, or it can be. So it's the third step, but sometimes these, you might wave in and out of them. Let in is about intentionally allowing in experiences that restore and sustain us. It focuses on cultivating positive emotions, such as connection and gratitude and meaning and care, that help the nervous system recover and support long-term engagement. Letting in doesn't mean forced positivity or holding a Pollyanna view of reality. It means allowing space for experiences, positive experiences like connection and meaning and gratitude and hope and humor. And often those things can grow out of taking action. Research shows that positive emotions help the nervous system recover from stress. So they don't cancel out grief or fear, but they can make it possible to kind of keep going in spite of the grief or the fear or the negative emotions. So next slide, this guide brings all of this together in a practical, accessible way. We hope it offers a framework, reflection questions, and simple practices people can use on their own in families, classrooms, workshops, or community spaces. And it's designed for a broad audience. So it's meant to be for educators, parents, youth, climate workers, and anyone trying to stay engaged without burning out. It's freely available and it's available in both English and Spanish, and we'll share a link to download it so you can explore it, use it, and share it. And there's a QR code as well on the slide that you can use to download it. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kate Yoder to guide the rest of our conversation today. By way of brief introduction, Kate is a senior staff writer at the climate news site Grist, where she writes about language, culture, and history.
Thank you so much, Larissa. It's a really timely time to be discussing emotional resilience. So thanks for sharing those resources. And next, we're going to turn to the panel. And my first question is for Joshua at the Yale program on climate change communication. Um, in this context, thinking about emotional resilience, what do we know about how Americans are feeling about climate change? And what do we know about mental distress in particular?
Yeah, Thank you, Kate. And thank you to the Climate Mental Health Network and Project Drawdown for creating this space. Larissa talked about some challenging emotions, and we all sometimes feel pretty lonely and stressed out when we think about climate change. But it's important to remember no matter what you feel about climate change, you're not alone. Others care, and others are feeling this. We know this because at the Yale program on climate change communication, we partner with the George Mason University to survey Americans twice a year in our Climate Change in the American Mind survey. And we found that Americans feel all sorts of things about climate change. They're angry, outraged, disgusted, the entire emotions wheel. And when we look at it, one of the most important emotion that we see is worry. About 65% of us are worried, and about a third of us say they're very worried. And when worry turns into mental distress, that's anxiety. Sometimes people get that a little bit confused. We've definitely seen some media outlets other than Grist get that confused. But you know, that worry is that key emotion that oftentimes correlates with action taking and whether or not people are alarmed. Research led by George Mason University scholars that we were part of showed that about 3% of Americans, or about 8 million adults, reported feeling serious levels of anxiety due to climate change. And some studies show that rates for young people and Latino have higher levels of anxiety. But just as people have a variety of emotions related to climate change, mental distress related to climate change can sometimes present itself in different ways, such as depression. And the good news is, though, just as like Larissa was talking about, where people have complex emotions, many people are not letting the mental distress or the worry get in the way of taking action, including the very important behavior of discussing climate change with family or friends.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, it's very easy to focus on obviously the huge negatives of mental distress, but it's interesting to think about, this flip side of taking action too. I know that you at the Yale program on climate communication have this framework called the Six Americas that
Mhm.
categorizes people by how concerned they are about climate change. Can you share more about that and what your latest findings are around that?
Yeah. One of the challenges that I see amongst activists is they see climate change as an immediate crisis. And they're right, it is. And then we want other people to see it as a crisis. We use language like climate emergency or code red. We've all seen these things. We've all said these things. But many people see climate change as a more distant problem in time and space. It's a problem for future generations, but not necessarily our family or ourselves. But Americans support solutions, and they engage with this issue in a variety of different ways. And the Six Americas is a way of understanding that. The Six Americas that we've identified are the alarmed, concerned, cautious, disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive. Uh, if you're on this call, you're probably part of the alarmed. That's the group that's most worried about climate change, sees it as a problem here and now, and though many people may not know what they can do about the issue, the level of worry is a key part of defining who is part of that alarmed category. The concerned think that climate change is real, but they see it as a more distant problem in time and space, a problem for future generations. They still, though, support many policy solutions to address the issue. The good news is that more than half of Americans are alarmed and concerned, and we'll release new numbers soon that update those numbers. But it was about 52% that are alarmed and concerned. When we ask the alarmed concerned or the doubtful and dismissive what questions they would ask an expert, The alarmed and concerned want to know what they can do about the problem. This is in contrast to the dismissive. The dismissive's only about 11% of Americans, and the alarmed outnumber the dismissive more than 2 to 1. It's just the dismissive are really loud. Sometimes they're in our family. There are our Uncle Bob that is loud at the Thanksgiving table. Sometimes they're in members of Congress. But most Americans are not dismissive. Most Americans are alarmed and concerned. And I find this really helpful. We have more opportunities to engage people, to connect across difference, and build a powerful social movement that is made up of resilient people. And by understanding how other people are experiencing climate change, this can help us connect with each other and build common ground. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so thankful to be part of this conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. In my reporting, I've, reported on how climate change has sort of started to disappear from the political conversation in the US. And I think it's really important to remember that, people really do care, even if it's not exactly what we're talking about most prevalently right now. And my next question is for Larissa, sort of responding to Joshua's findings. How do those findings that he mentioned point to the need for this resilience framework?
Yeah, I mean, I think well, first of all, I really related to the Uncle Bob. I have one of those in my family, Joshua. But the findings that I think overall that Joshua shared really point to the fact that climate change is not just a scientific or a policy issue, that it's really already an emotional reality for a large and growing portion of Americans. The majority of Americans, as he said, are worried about climate change, and many of them are experiencing painful emotions about what this means and will mean for their lives, their families, and their future. I count myself among them. And as Joshua noted, that worry can actually be a motivator for engagement and action, which is great. But at the same time, there's a limit. When worry and direct exposure to climate impacts, undergoing a wildfire, a flood, a storm, when those kind of emotional impacts really accumulate without enough support or processing, then that worry can turn into clinically impairing anxiety or burnout or disengagement and avoidance as a way of coping. And we're seeing this also very clearly through lived experience. Regardless of people's beliefs about climate change, the number of Americans who have been directly impacted by disasters is quickly increasing, and that has real mental health consequences. There was a recent study that just came out last month from the Department of Angels about the survivors of the LA wildfires. It was like the 1 year retrospective. They've been doing studies every quarter since the fires, and they found, a year later that 83% of survivors reported that their mental health was worse than it was before the fires. So this is where emotional resilience becomes really essential. It's not about reducing concern or fixing people's feelings about climate change. It's about building capacity to stay present with these hard emotions and these hard realities without becoming overwhelmed or shut down. I really love Leslie Davenport's definition of emotional resilience. Leslie is a climate psychologist and a thinker and author in this field. And she defines climate emotional resilience as the capacity to stay present, open, and empathetic, even as the world around us becomes more stressful and uncertain. So just being able to stay like engaging instead of kind of being terrified and turning away or avoiding or withdrawing from the problem, like so many, or just trying not to think about it because it's too scary. So that is, in her definition, resilience is that ability to stay engaged, to stay present and empathetic to, all the effects of climate change. And yeah, our framework was really created to build that kind of capacity, that kind of resilience by helping people kind of acknowledge and process their emotions and we can, help them through that to build the capacity to stay open and present and engage with the world as it is with all its uncertainty and difficulty and without sacrificing their mental health and emotional well-being.
Yeah, that's a really striking example from the LA fires. Could you tell us more about how taking action is related to resilience and how your model addresses this?
Yeah, so taking action and resilience really reinforce and feed into one another. Resilience, as we see it, is that resilience is what makes taking action sustainable. And action is one of the most reliable ways to build agency and hope, which are key parts of resilience. They feed into resilience. So kind of in the framework, in terms of the model or the framework, let be really builds awareness and clarity, awareness of our feelings and clarity about, what we're feeling. When you can name what you're feeling, fear or grief or anger, you're less likely to be kind of hijacked by it or overwhelmed by it. And you're more able to ask, what message does this emotion have for me? Why am I feeling this, anxiety, for example? What is it trying to tell me? What's the value, what value of mine is being compromised and therefore triggering these alarm bells in my body and my brain? And then maybe the answer is that you feel something needs to change. For me, that's what it is when I feel climate anxiety. It's this, the anxiety is there to tell me like something is not right. Something needs to change. I need to act. I need to do more. I need to get together with people in my community and keep working away at this problem. So let be can really be the seed of meaningful, purposeful action. And let flow builds emotion regulation. So if we try to act from a state of constant stress and anxiety, we often burn out or shut down or lash out at the people around us. So let flow, that part of, that emotion processing part, it keeps action from becoming self-destructive. It helps us recover and return to balance so that we can act from a more stable and centered and sustainable place. And then let in, the kind of letting in of positive emotions is really a fuel for action. Things like connection and meaning and purpose and a sense of humor and hope through action. All of that, all of those kind of positive emotions and experiences keep engagement with climate change going. Taking action with others can be especially protective because it combines agency and a sense of belonging and meaning. So action really isn't a replacement for emotional processing, and emotion processing isn't a detour from action. A lot of times people will just feel like they should just get straight to the action and, we don't need all this emotional fluff. But really, they're really connected. Resilience is there to help you act. We've seen so many times, activists who are so dedicated but just end up burning out because it's too much. So the resilience is there to help, sustain action. And action, in turn, taking action helps you, again, like feel agency and connection with others, and that increases resilience. So that's, I think, the recipe for kind of creating durable engagement that can last over time.
Yeah, it's a good recipe. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing it with us. I have a question now for Elizabeth from Project Drawdown. I think that climate change is a really overwhelming topic, and it's kind of additionally overwhelming to figure out what to do about it. And so I know you've looked at ways that it can be, what's most effective. So what are the most effective ways you found for people to take action to address climate change? And can you also share a little bit about your new platform and what it offers?
Yeah, absolutely, Kate. And I think Larissa teed me up so well in terms of taking action being such a great step in the resilience pathway. So, folks, I'd love to share some slides. So I'm going to do that, and we're going to look at um, the Drawdown Explorer. So here we are. Welcome, everybody, to the Drawdown Explorer. The Drawdown Explorer is a free online climate solutions platform that really helps us figure out how to take action. What solutions do we want to lean into? Which solutions are we most excited about and why? Who's doing work in this space and what might we want to learn from? So let's look a little bit deeper. Okay, if you want to learn about Explorer yourself, you can go to drawdown.org/explorer. On that site, you will find currently I think we have 83 solutions that we've analyzed, and we have an incredible team at Project Drawdown. Huge gratitude to all those super smart folks. We have about 100 more on the way, so stay tuned. Sign up for our newsletter. We announce every time we release new solutions. It's in our newsletter, so that link will be sent out in a follow-up email if you're not on our newsletter already. That said, all right, we're looking at solutions. We can sort them by classification. We classify the solutions. Highly recommended. Folks, those are things we should do. Worthwhile, keep watching, and not recommended. This is the first time we've really talked about things we don't recommend. Now, some of those not recommended solutions might actually be really incredible in the future. There may be many reasons why they're not recommended right now. All of that is in the analysis. So I'd invite you to check that out. You can filter by classification, by sector, and then you can just play with it. So let's do that. Let's look at some of these solutions. Okay, first, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into improving cement production. Don't fall asleep, folks. I promise you, improving cement production, so interesting, super impactful. 3 different pathways that we can look at here when we think about taking action. See, some people do like the improving cement production. Clinker substitution, alternative fuels, and process efficiency upgrades. I'm not going to go into all of the details because I'd love for you to actually check out the solution on your own. So, improving cement production. Highly recommended solution. We have a science-based research summary at the top of every one of our highly recommended solutions so you know why it matters. Why should you care about improving cement production? Great question. We can help you figure that out. We then have a dashboard that has 3 specific cards. One card focuses on the basics of that solution. The next, the impact on the climate, and the third, the additional benefits. So let me show you a little bit about the basics of this solution. So if you scroll down on the Drawdown Explorer website, you scroll below the dashboard, we have a much more thorough overview that often has downloadable graphics. Did I mention this is free? All of this is free. Download what you want, share what you want, talk to your any community groups you're with, get them excited about these solutions, whether or not it's improving cement production. But you have downloadable graphics. We also, when we keep looking, if we keep scrolling down, if you want to get beyond the basics, you can go into the details section. All of these areas are expandable. All the nerdy details are there for you to geek out about. Then, if we want to go beyond the basics, let's really look at the solution's climate impact. This is where the Explorer gets its name. We have the impact calculator as a tool for you to explore different aspects of this climate solution. So, for example, you might want to look at the effectiveness and the adoption of this particular solution. Those are movable sliders. You can move those sliders and you'll see the impact on the climate on a 20 or a 100-year basis, which is pretty cool. Now, this aspect of the Explorer is being used by all sorts of people with a whole lot of money who want to figure out where they can have the biggest return on investment in their climate philanthropy or investments. It's being used by community groups to say, hey, I live in Southeast Alaska. What's the best solution for me to work on? It's being used by all sorts of people. Going back to Larissa's point, it's giving folks a place to start taking action. It helps people figure out what climate solution do I want to work on to have the largest impact, because why do it if it's not going to be impactful, right? So we have the basics, we have the climate impact, and we have additional benefits. So the additional benefits section goes beyond just reducing or avoiding carbon emissions, right? We know that we all do so many things for so many different reasons. So when we think about improving cement production, let's look at health. Let's look at air quality as additional benefits to implementing this solution. So all of the solutions that are highly recommended have this section, and I love this section. Another section I love is our geographical data. Now, all of these data are cited below. It's tricky to get all sorts of different kinds of data. So we sometimes, for this data layer in particular, when we think about cement, This data layer talks about the annual cement plant emissions from 2024. Now, why do we care about that? Well, let's say that you're trying to figure out where are most of the emissions coming from related to cement. Then you might want to compare it to a data layer about where is most of the production happening. So in this instance, I zoomed in on the US so we can see which of the cement production factories are actually producing the most cement. So when we think about how we might use this, which plants might benefit the most from some of these improving cement solutions? More data, love it. Each highly recommended solution also has a take action section focus on 9 stakeholder groups who have unique levers for implementing the solution. So let's say that all of us here are focused on communities, households, and individuals. Boom. I never knew I could do something related to improving cement production, but guess what, folks? We can. Our team has looked at what are the different levers that communities, households, and individuals can do, specifically about improved cement production. And there's further information. Short story, we all have levers we can pull, right? Figure out where you want to take action, with who, in what, which of those stakeholder groups. We've got resources for you. So here's my ask of you. I really encourage you to use the Drawdown Explorer. I'd love for you to find your pathway to climate action. Drawdown.org/explorer. Back to you, Kate. I'll stop sharing. There we are.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I really like the energy you brought to climate solutions and cement production in particular. And based on the emoji reactions, I think everyone else did too.
I don't know that we
Um,
expected cement production to get so many emojis today, everybody. Thank you.
it's really gaining traction.
We're
I
becoming a
as
meme, Kate. We're going to be a meme soon.
that's really my dream. My next question for you is about a particular solution to climate change. As someone who covers how we talk about climate change, how we, communicate, how culture changes, I've often heard that like talking about climate change itself is a solution. So I'm curious, like, why do you think it's important to talk about, for people to talk about why they care about climate change and what we can do to address it?
I love that. Thanks so much, Kate. And I'll actually send folks also towards someone who I adore in the climate space. Dr. Catherine Hayhoe speaks a lot. She actually has a talk climate Substack. She does all sorts of things related to, oh, look at all the emojis for Catherine. All right, everybody. She speaks a lot about the importance of talking about climate change. So at Project Drawdown, I just shared Drawdown Explorer, which is really focused on the science-based solutions to stopping climate change, right? So we look at the science behind what are the problems, and then on the flip side, what are the solutions? What we decided to do around like why is it important to talk about it was to talk, unsurprisingly, to Dr. Kimberly Nicholas, who's a fantastic researcher at Lund University in Sweden. She wrote a book called We Can Fix It, and we collaborated on a another tool. So I'm going to share my screen again, folks. Here you go. You're going to come with me on a little journey. We're going to look at Shift. Shift is the super high impact initiative for fixing tomorrow. It's a pretty great acronym, if I do say so myself. Good job, team. So created by Project Drawdown, Dr. Kimberly Nicholas. She is a climate scientist as well as a behavioral scientist, wicked smart. And you can find that all online at jointheshift.earth. Now, what in the world is Shift? It focuses on 5 research-based climate superpowers. So actions that you can take as a citizen, as a professional, an investor, a consumer, and a role model. Those are all probably hats that we wear at different points in our lives, if not multiple hats per every day. Really connecting our personal choices to bigger collective change. I saw some folks in the Q&A asking about, what to do when they feel hopeless or they feel like what they do doesn't matter. I think this is one of the antidotes to that, right? And that's where talking about climate change comes in. So if any of you out there are asking, what can I actually do to address climate change? My hope is that Shift will be the answer. Shift guides you to the actions that matter the most. We did not want to give you a list of 101 things to do to save the earth. I have plenty of those books on my shelf that have sat collecting dust for a long time because it's overwhelming. It's too much. What we wanted to do is really give you a full personalized action guide so that you can take the next best step based on where you're at in your life, right? We all have a million things going on. We also have a lot of fear, a lot of passion to work on climate. So let's channel that in the most effective ways possible. So, one of those actions, as Kate mentioned, is talking about climate change. It's a high impact action within our role model superpower. So the key actions, there are 5 key actions within this superpower. Build climate community. So grateful for the other panelists on this webinar who are part of my climate community. Walk the talk. Talk about the walk. Tell people what you're doing, right? Tell your neighbor why you are installing solar panels on your roof or why you've decided to get a heat pump. Start to talk about that. Start climate conversations and listen and inspire cultural change to support climate action. Now, these might not directly reduce or avoid greenhouse gas emissions, but what they're doing is they are the enablers to that action, right? So I don't want to just leave you with a list. That is not what Shift does. Here's what we actually do in Shift, right? We describe the high impact action. So, for example, starting climate conversations and listening. And then we provide you with key resources and support to help you succeed in taking that action. We're not just going to leave you high and dry. So, with starting climate conversations and listening, here's one of the 3 ways that you might get started with this action. You might notice it says, here are 3 ways to get started, and the screen only gave me enough real estate to show you one. Would love for you to check out the other 2 ways for you to start a climate conversation and listen. So, what are you waiting for? We would love for you to join us to lean into your climate superpowers at jointheshift.earth. Totally free. We just want people to have the tools so that they feel like they can lean into those superpowers and take the most impactful actions.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. It was really great to see it all laid out like that. And honestly, it makes us feel like we're part of the solution right now because we're talking about climate change, right?
We sure are. I mean, and all the people who are with us, we've got loads of folks on this webinar right now. Thank you for being here to start a conversation about climate change. And, hopefully we're meeting you where you're at and you could take that next best step.
So now we're going to move on to our Q&A section. I think our first question is going to be, what skills do we need to build to get better at developing emotional resilience in the context of climate change? And especially, why is building community important?
I can jump in. Yeah, the research shows that resilience doesn't stem from kind of rare traits or superhuman strength, but really from ordinary everyday supports and capacities. Um, that's why the resilience researcher Anne Masden famously called resilience ordinary magic, because it grows out of everyday skills and supports that are available to most people. And some of these key skills, which provide some of the basis for the resilience resource, are emotional awareness and emotion regulation, finding meaning and purpose in climate change and climate action, problem solving and flexibility, and crucially, social connection and community. In terms of why community is important, human beings really just aren't wired to face long-term threat on their own. Our nervous systems just aren't built for it. We're built to kind of regulate in relationship with others. And so being in community provides really practical support on one level. We really saw that with the LA wildfires. And it's a sense of that the responsibility and the burden is shared rather than kind of carried individually. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And we also see when we're thinking about building a climate movement or getting people to continue to take action, that those organizations that build a sense of belonging and community are oftentimes the ones that people keep coming back to. So as people are organizers or community leaders, I think really thinking about how your organization can build that sense of community, that sense of belonging, and let people know how they're making an impact. Because as a movement, we're making a giant impact on this problem. People are figuring out the solutions to reduce the emissions from concrete. I mean, that's a hard problem, and there are solutions, and that's because we're all working at this in our own different ways. Um, and I think one of the skills, in addition to like building this sense of belonging, but one that contributes to that, is really figuring out how we can be better at actively listening and engaging each other in those conversations. So we worked with a group called Neighbors United in British Columbia that did deep canvassing on climate change. And one of the things they found was everybody had a climate story, but they didn't know it yet. They didn't know that. And so it really took that active listening skill to really draw that out. And it moved people from not really knowing much about climate change to taking action. And it made a real difference in that campaign. Um, so I think that those are a couple of things that I would love to see us and as a climate movement improve our skills on.
I would also encourage folks. So when we talk about, finding our community, we had someone in the Q&A mention that they're a banker and maybe feel kind of alone in that world. And I would encourage folks to find your people, right? Maybe it's not another banker, maybe it is, right? Like find the people who are making the change. One really inspiring space is actually insurance, right? We know that the insurance companies and the actuaries in particular are freaking out about the impacts of climate change. And there are, the major insurance companies have climate scientists on their teams now. So they know it's real. For the person in the Q&A who wanted to know how to talk to their dad about climate change, maybe your dad cares about insurance rates. That's one thing, right? That could be a door into a conversation about climate, right? So if the insurance companies care about it, it's probably actually happening, right? And it's a thing to work on. So I digress. Coming back to the focus, really being finding your people. You're not alone, right? Regardless of your profession, let's say you work in a school cafeteria, right? How can you find other food service workers who are focusing on reducing beef and increasing plant forward menus for students? There's all sorts of different ways that we can be creative and find folks who can inspire us to implement solutions in the ways that we are best able to do it.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in again and to both of to chime in on what you both said that in terms of kind of having those conversations that a lot of times, and Joshua, you mentioned this at the very beginning of this Q&A that 64% of Americans or 65% are worried, but only about a third of Americans ever talk about it with other people. So we call that pluralistic ignorance, right? There's this false sense that we're alone with our worries, and it's just because people aren't saying it out loud. They're not talking about it. And so when we talk about those things, it makes people feel validated in their concerns, not alone, and it really emboldens people to take action. And I think honestly, like as a psychologist, we know that people really a lot of behavior is driven by, just watching what other people do and copying them. When people don't know what to do, they follow social norms. And so hearing people talk about it, seeing other people act, by doing action in your community or in your sphere of influence, you're really setting a social norm that this is a normal thing that bankers do, for example. And you can establish those new norms in your sphere of influence, and it can be a really powerful impetus for encouraging other people to do the same.
Yeah, and I can tell you for sure, I know of bankers who do work in climate action. I'm actually talking to a bunch of bankers later this month about where the American people are and what they can do as bankers to talk about climate change, to engage people. But that's true whether it's the Green Bank Association or it's some of our biggest banks. And there's a lot of work to be done to clean up our banks, to do better work. So there's a real opportunity for climate action. And that's true, like Elizabeth was saying, no matter what line of work you're in.
Yeah, that was a great discussion. And I do think a lot about, at Grist, we have climate plus like every topic it interacts with, like culture, justice, and like the list goes on and on. And it just shows how many different ways there are into this problem. And Larissa, I really liked what you mentioned too about social norms. I've really been intrigued for a long time by this idea that peer pressure can actually be used for good, especially around climate action. And it's like, we never talk about peer pressure as a solution. And I have another question for you all. It's definitely been, discouraging time for climate action in the US, to put it lightly. And I'm wondering, like, how are you personally coping with the current situation, given that we're, talking about emotional resilience? And then is there anything in particular that you find inspiring right now?
Well, what I'm inspired by is just how many people are taking action in all different walks of life and figuring out ways that they can make a difference. Really, when we look at the data, the survey data, Americans really haven't moved that much, in terms of their beliefs on climate action. The broader sort of elite debate moved, and people misinterpreted the 2024 election, but they you should be hopeful that most Americans support climate solutions and want to see these things happen. The question is, how do we build a climate movement, and people who are taking action in support of that movement that is broad based, that is able to engage and able to build public and political will, to that. And, you know, today and this time where things feel a little bit discouraging are the times that we're going to be planting the seeds, for when we're going to be harvesting the policies, the movement, the other action taking, in years to come, because it's going to take all of us taking action for a really long time. And so not getting too discouraged in this time, figuring out how to be emotionally resilient, because we're not alone. It may, despite what the Trump administration wants you to believe, we're not alone.
Larissa and Elizabeth, was there anything you wanted to add?
I feel inspired by, first of all, the number of people who were interested in this webinar today. We had over 1,500 registrants, many of who will, I'm sure, watch the recording, or just, just the fact that there's so much interest in resilience and thriving and how to get through this moment and how to take action. So I think that's very encouraging, and we see a lot of kind of support and interest from, in our work from many different kind of areas of work. You were talking about bankers and investment and insurance. We see, we get inquiries and do workshops and webinars with all kinds of people from all different kind of segments of life and all kind of professional segments. So I think that's really encouraging. And yeah, I think I've also just been really inspired to see kind of the level of community support that has come out from the LA wildfires, from both, all walks of life, like very kind of, including teenagers. I'm thinking in particular like the Altadena girls who are out there, supporting people and, alongside kind of older folks and nonprofits and community members and residents, and how much just kind of community how much the community has come out for the survivors and those who are really impacted deeply by that wildfire. There's still like a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done to help individuals and communities recover and to build resilience, physical and emotional resilience. Um, but I think that and to prepare for future disasters. But I think that's been very encouraging to see kind of what has happened here in LA.
And I'll build on that, Larissa. I think one of the misconceptions I think folks fall into is that we need to wait for elected officials to act. And that couldn't be further from the truth, right? And we, those of us in the US do not necessarily have a federal administration that's acting yet. We don't wait for them to save us on everything. And that's where I think I get really inspired by local work, by Rotary clubs, by faith communities, by all sorts of different ways that people are coming together to build community and make change. And that brings me so much hope, right? We are not just sitting on our hands for the next few years in the US or even in other parts around the world. Like we have the tools, we have the solutions. Just do it, right? Like let's start working on it. For those of you who said you've been in the climate space for a while, try something new, work with new people, bring your message to other folks. You don't have to just do, write a new ordinance. I mean, that's fine too, but there's so many pathways you can explore. And I just really encourage people to keep trying, try different pathways, keep making change.
Yeah, I think those are really great points that we're in this for the long haul and that, we can't just wait around for others to take action, but to, especially with the importance of building community too. I've been thinking a lot about, the social science research around what happens after a disaster. And I think the first thing that comes to our mind is sort of this like apocalypse Hollywood situation where everyone turns on each other. But actually, research shows that people, tend to come together and support each other. So I think there's a lot of promise in terms of, just like getting to know your neighbors and creating community. And that can be a solution in a way too. Let's see. I think we're actually about out of time here. I just want to say like thank you so much to our speakers today. You all did an amazing job. It was amazing to, get to hear your thoughts and speak with you. And also thank you to our partners who are supporting this event. And the one last thing I wanted to make sure everyone knows is that we have this survey about the webinar. And if you enter it, you'll be eligible to win a book in a raffle, those books that we saw at the beginning. So please take some time to fill that out if you'd like. We'd love to hear your feedback. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight.